Good afternoon. My name is Ana Henriquez, and I am the editor-in-chief for the OWL newspaper. Thank you all for joining us today for our political forum, Why This Election Matters, Is America Under Attack? This forum is a collaboration between the Office of Student Engagement and Leadership and Student Publications. Student Publications consists of the OWL newspaper and the Reflections Literary and Arts magazine. For more information on student publications, please see our table outside and be sure to pick up a copy of the latest issue of the newspaper. With this forum, I hope that you all gain a better understanding about the election process and why your vote is important. Your vote is your voice when it comes to politics, and it is important that you make your voice heard. I'll now introduce our SGA president, Michael Floresca, to come and speak.
Hello everybody, good afternoon. I'm Mikhail Floresca. Something I want us all to recognize is the underappreciated value of voting. Now, in the large scheme of things, one vote seems so small in comparison to everything else. But what is the purpose of the vote? We take our minds all the way back and find that we elect the person who decides who immigrates where, who decides what people go to jail, who decides the decisions that make our country democratic, Republican, and great. Today, we ask why this election matters to figure out why us, the young people, have a contribution and a responsibility to a future that is as dark and polarized. So today, all of us have gathered together to ask the $100 question. Is America under attack? And with your 2 cents, let's answer this $100 question. Thank you so much.
My advisor, Mr. Gray, will now introduce the guest panelists.
Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us. Again, on behalf of Student Publications, we want to welcome you to what we hope will be a transformative day in your lives, because the right to vote is a priceless commodity. It is a commodity that these days is under attack, as democracy, you could say, is around the world and has now made its way towards the United States. So it's important for you all, the millennial generation, to become ready to inherit an enormous responsibility that starts with simply becoming a registered voter. And with that, in order to make your vote count, you have to become an informed citizen. Remember, to whom much is given, much is required. And participation in the political process is, well, a generational requirement now for all of you millennials. I remember Arthur Ashe saying that the most disappointing thing that he ever saw in his life was when folks had a chance to step up and they simply didn't take a swing. So what I would like to enlighten you with today as college students is a reminder that changes always come from smart, critically thought-provoking ideas from young generations that you are benefiting from today. I mean, think about it. This is a campus full of minorities. Diversity is personified here. 50, 60 years ago, Dr. Leon, it wasn't like that. There have been people who have died, elders, so we can have this priceless right to vote. And it's being taken for granted. You know, leaders of change have always been college students, whether it's SNCC, Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, the SCLC, the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, even the rank and file members of the NAACP were all college students. People who sat in at the line, at the Woolworths, they were college students. So this is your time. And one of the great leaders of change that you might be familiar with was our 44th president, who cut his teeth as a community organizer while a college student. So it has become so important for you today to become aware how politics affects you, because it does. And whether it's presidential or local policies, what seems boring now will become what you pay for when you start owning homes, having families, and hopefully acquiring wealth. So this forum today is not about influencing your vote. We don't want anybody to leave here thinking they have to vote a certain way. However, we do hope that after today you're armed with the intellectual capital to A, know what questions to ask of candidates before you cast your vote, to think about where you want to be in 20 years and what are the important issues of today that may affect you moving forward, because 20 years is going to fly by. You will be 40 before you know it. Where do you want to be when you're 40? So I would hope that today motivates you to feel that now, or you can ask yourself the question, what can I do to become a change agent in my community, my nation, and the world? And with that, let's meet our guests. Sitting to my immediate left is Julius P. Terrell. He is the principal at JPT Law. The law firm specializes in probate and real estate and family law in the District of Columbia and the state of Maryland. He's practiced law for over 25 years. He began his career serving as staff counsel in the United States House of Representatives 103rd Congress. While in Congress, he worked on telecommunications legislation, District of Columbia finances, and various other federal laws. After leaving his congressional service, Mr. Terrell worked for the U.S. Department of Labor and the District of Columbia's Retirement Board. He also developed an expertise in working with the administration and financial management of pension funds. He's an NCAA men's basketball referee and a former candidate for Orphans Court Judge in Prince George's County, Mr. Julius Terrell. All the way down, well, in the middle is Guy Lambert, who's worked in the radio broadcast industry for over 20 years. Currently, he serves as the news director for the Joe Clair Morning Show on 95.5 WPGC. And he's also co-host of the Hughley Truth, a weekly podcast that is hosted by comedian D.L. Hughley. His career in broadcasting and radio spans across various markets and popular morning shows, including the Donnie Simpson Show, the Big Tigger Show, and the Funky Larry Jones Morning Show. He's now also a regular correspondent on Fox 5 News, appearing on shows such as Good Day DC. What's the new show, Guy?
Like It or Not.
Like It or Not. And he's recently been seen sitting in as guest anchor on Fox News Plus with Sean Yancey. Give it up for Guy Lambert. And then there's the incomparable Dr. Wilmer J. Leon, who's the author of Politics, Another Perspective, commentary and analysis on race, war, ethics, and the American political landscape in the age of Obama. He's a political scientist whose primary areas of expertise are black politics, American government, and public policy. He's also host of the Critical Hour, which is on Radio Sputnik, channel 105.5, Monday through Fridays from 6 to 7 p.m. Eastern Time, and Inside the Issues with Wilmer Leon on Sirius XM Satellite Radio, channel 126 Saturday mornings, Saturdays from 11 a.m. to 2 p.m. East Coast time. He earned his BS degree in political science from Hampton Institute, now Hampton University, a master's in public administration from Howard University. So you just don't know what side of the fence you're on, do you?
I do know.
Okay. He's got his PhD in political science from Howard, and he was also a contributing author to Democratic Destiny in the District of Columbia. Again, Dr. Wilma Leon. So we're going to open it up, gentlemen, and keep it quick. You know, today's forum is about why this election matters. You know, why does it matter, in your opinion, for this election to millennials who are getting into the process? I'll start with you, Doc.
Well, let me first answer, is America under attack?
Okay.
And I believe the answer is absolutely, positively, yes it is. But it's not an external force, it's an internal force. I think America is collapsing under its own weight of imperialism. And we know that at some point in the historical spectrum, all empires have to change. You don't believe me? Ask the Romans, ask the Greeks. Well, you can't, because they're not here anymore. There was a time when the adage was, the sun never sets on the British Empire. Well, now that's a place you go for good scotch and nasty food. So all empires come and go. And I think the problem that America is now facing, it's under an internal attack. The ruling elite versus the rest of us. And America is struggling, trying to figure out how it is going to be able to move forward and sustain itself as China comes to the forefront, as Russia comes to the forefront, and some of the other industrialized countries whose economies are growing rapidly. So America is under attack most definitely, but I think the attack is internal. The election matters to millennials for a number of reasons. One, Mitch McConnell just bragged about the Trump administration changing the federal court system forever. With the number of judges that they are now rushing through the Senate for approval, and the ideological nature and bent of those judges is going to be impacting you all for many. One of the most lasting elements that a president, or impact that a president can have, are the judges that are appointed to the circuit bench and to the Supreme Court. And so McConnell, after putting the brakes on President Obama being allowed to get his justices through, the impact on the federal bench is going to be monumental. Deregulation is going to be huge for you all, because right now there's an awful lot of talk about red tape, government red tape. Pharmaceutical companies can't get products to market fast enough because of government red tape. Oil companies can't drill in certain places because of regulation. They just had an oil spill on the pipeline. I think it was in South Dakota, I think it was. And so one of the things that I always find interesting about the deregulation conversation is they always talk about deregulation on the side of business, but they never talk about regulation on the side of the consumer. And regulations are there primarily to protect your health, to protect your environment, to protect you as individuals. And if you got any questions about that, go do some research on thalidomide and thalidomide babies from the 1960s and why thalidomide is no longer on the market. Final point, hate groups are rising. The Southern Poverty Law Center has shown over the last 4 years, hate group violence has risen over 30%. And that's not really as a result of Donald Trump. What Donald Trump has done with his rhetoric, it has empowered those groups that have been existing in this country for a number of years. So there is a statistically significant correlation between the election of Donald Trump and the rise of hate groups in this country. So those are three areas why I think this election is incredibly important to millennials.
Guy, you definitely on the pulse, or with somebody who's on the pulse of what is most important with this generation. What say you?
Well, first, let me start by saying, ladies and gentlemen, these two brothers that are sitting right beside me, very well educated and very well spoken. I want you to understand what I do is pretty much take the information that they say, disseminate it, and then, well, in essence, regurgitate it to a certain extent so that it's in layman's terms. So what these guys say, make sure you take heed. With regard to my colleague and what the doctor said, I have to agree. I will echo, your remark, quite honestly. One of the things that I think we didn't touch on happens to be immigration. And when you think immigration, you hear everybody talking about it. You hear me on the radio saying, hey, President Trump did this and did that with regard to immigration. The reason why it's important to each one of you in here, number one, you got to watch how folks are treated. The doctor made mention of a lot of these groups being empowered. I like to say the word emboldened. That's the word for me for 2019, because a lot of folks feel bold so I will talk to you as if I talked to my nephew. So they tripping, prime example. And when they're tripping, they're feeling emboldened, if you will. They're feeling like they have the power to speak their mind when what they're saying isn't necessarily correct. And so it's your job. You and guess how many other millennials are represented right here in America now? 75 million. That's a lot of folks, y'all. So that's why it's so important that you get out and you cast your vote, because each one of you that are sitting here right now, you're the one that's going to make the decision as to what happens with immigration. And you watch how those folks are treated, because ultimately you might be treated just that same way. And if you don't like how they're being treated, well, just imagine how you're going to be treated. Do you get what I'm saying? Do you follow me here? That's why it's so important that you all get out and cast your vote. Another word that I think about since this administration has been running things, and that happens to be divisiveness. I have never, ever in my life, and for those of you who don't know, I'm 43, I've never, ever felt so much hostility when you walk around. Do you see it? I mean, there was a time where you could be a Democrat, I could be a Republican, you could be a Republican, I could be a Democrat and independent. We're all just friends. We might disagree from a political standpoint, but it doesn't necessarily mean that there has to be hostility as soon as you walk in the room. I think that comes from the top. Once again, it's the rhetoric that's used, it's the way that makes each and every one of you feel, and I'm a real energy person, and if the energy is coming out negative, then in essence, that's what you're gonna get in return.
Julius, go ahead.
Thank you. This election cycle.
Bring the mic over to you.
This
Yeah,
election cycle is probably the most important election in the last 50 years. Why do we vote? Voting is about deciding who the leaders will be to divvy up scarce resources. What we have in this country is a limited amount of everything, and our elected officials decide which way that pie is going to be cut up. When we cast our vote, now we're saying, okay, we buy into the vision that this person who we are electing, or who we cast our vote for, we're buying into their vision. And what we see now is, in this country, what the good doctor was really getting at from my view, is that there are a lot of people out there scared right now. They're scared because the resources are being cut up in such a way that people who traditionally didn't receive funds have to get a share of those funds. So let's take it down to a very local level. We elect county execs, we elect council persons, and they decide where our resources are going to go to in our community. So we have a pothole in our street. We leave our house, we hit a pothole. Now the person who's driving the car, we realize that this street needs to be paved. Well, who makes that decision? That decision, most of the time, is a local decision that goes to the council. The council decides, okay, well, we're going to put X amount of money into repairing streets. Well, if schools need money, if other areas in the community need money, the amount of money that may have to be allocated to paving the streets begins to shrink. On a larger level, what this president, 45, came into office, really, looking at was the infrastructure in our country being at a condition that needed to be addressed. We've never gotten to that issue. Why? Well, the objective that the president has, he hasn't been able to lay out his agenda. The Democrats continue to have their agenda. The single most important issue for us as a society today, I believe, is our infrastructure. Now, I travel the world. I've been to recently. I went to China, and in Beijing, just China train system is incredible. Speed trains, they levitate. They don't even hit the track. They have some technology where the trains are able to zip through. If you go here and go to Amtrak, it's an antiquated railroad system. Well, that's infrastructure. Who's going to pay for that? We need that type of issue addressed, and it is the elected officials who begin to decide what our agenda is. So for the 2020 cycle, we're going to put people into office who are going to be deciding what our objectives are for 20 to 30 years in the future. When you and your children begin to look at these issues, those things would have been set this year or in years to come, and our votes put those people into place to set the agenda to make sure that is preserved for the best interests of our society. And right now, we're not working together. And that's a whole nother issue of why we're not working together. But I believe, and I submit, it's a lot of hatred of realizing that individuals that they're sharing these scarce resources with, they're going to be in the majority in the next 15 to 20 years. The brown person will be in the majority. So now they're beginning to see, well, hey, I've got to keep these resources under my control to such a degree that they're not allowing others to partake. And if they did, they probably would find that the country would be far better off.
Wow, thanks a lot. Staying with today's theme, from mass shootings in Orlando and El Paso, Texas, to vehicular homicides in Charlottesville, Virginia, and even the Russian interference in the 2016 elections. And then, of course, you probably could argue that there's random acts of violence over chicken sandwiches in the hood. America seems to be under attack in a variety of different ways. Where are we most vulnerable, gentlemen? Where is this generation most, or what should they be in most fear of? Julius, let's start with you.
I think that that question picks up to this hatred issue. We're not getting along as a people. The United States of America is supposed to be united for a common objective, for the best interest of the country. But because of the factionalism, because of the attempts to control these limited amount of resources, people are uncomfortable with change. We look at, on a school level, we have economic issue. What's the economic issue that affects colleges now? The issue with athletes being able to control their likeness and image. Well, you've had NCAA, which is a body of universities that form a membership organization. They have, since they've been created, they've been able to control the monies that come into the NCAA for the purposes that the presidents decide. Well, now, people have looked at this issue and said, well, why are athletes able to go to a college and play sports, but yet they can't participate in the billions of dollars that have come from a non-traditional stream of revenue like electronic gaming? Electronic gaming didn't exist 15 or 20 years ago. The universities were able to monetize that, but because of the greed, realizing that, hey, this is money that we can tenure faculty member, we can do different things on a university level. Well, those things are objectives by the university, but what happens to the athlete who's competing, say with football. You got individuals who have concussions, who leave universities, they have no health care. We have a limited amount of persons advocating for the best interest of the whole. In this instance, the presidents, those individuals controlling those resources aren't looking at the best interest for the future of the student athlete. They're looking for the best interest of their control over this pot of money. So because of their blind-sidedness of looking at how to keep the system the way it is, they're really undercutting their ability. All they had to do was find a way to incorporate individuals to receive, some type of benefit on a long range basis. I think the hatred is, if you're not flexible enough to look at an issue to solve it by including as many persons in solving that problem, you're limiting yourself. And that's one of I think that's the Achilles heel that we face as a nation. We're looking at problems too narrowly, but we want to keep control of what has been. But we've got to be, futuristic and look forward in solutions.
I agree. You touched on it earlier with regard to the whole hatred aspect. I think for you guys, millennials, it happens to be social media. What do we do when we got here today? What did everybody do? They came in, we took a selfie. Look, you're taking a picture now probably. You're going to post it on Instagram, Snapchat, Facebook, Twitter, what have you. I can tell you that when I was your age, the number one way that I would obtain information my age group would obtain information is immediately would be the radio. From there it would be television, and then from there newspaper. Nowadays, you all get your information immediately how? Social media. Now with social media, I work at a TV station in a newsroom, and I can tell you so many times we'll get a viewer that will call in and say, hey, I witnessed this or witnessed that, I posted it to our social media. They have the information and or the video prior to the actual news station having it to release it to the masses. With that, and I know we're going to touch on this a little bit later, you have to be careful as to what you deem to be real and not real with regard to social media, because in essence, it has become God's word because you saw it on Twitter, you saw it on Facebook, or you saw it on Instagram. I think that's a major concern. I think you need to realize that with regard to social media, it can be fake or it can be real. It's up to you as an individual to make sure you do the research to find out whether or not it is fake or it is real. Along with the social media, what else do you see on there? Well, just like my colleague said, and just like he made mention of, hate. And when you have a platform which you could really appeal to the masses, well, my spewing hate is a lot easier to tell 8 million other folks versus me just sitting right here in this room and talking about it. Social media, I think, is the number one concern for this generation, and I think you all need to be very careful with regard to how you use it, handle it, and or abuse it.
To follow on to what Guy just said, the media is key, but the big problem that I see with American corporate media is the misrepresentation of fact and reality. And the fact that so much of what we see is controlled by, or the perspective that the analysis, so-called analysis comes from the military-industrial complex, whether that be Lockheed Martin, McDonnell Douglas, Raytheon Corporation, and it also comes from agribusiness. You look at Archer Daniels Midland and some of the other major agricultural conglomerates that control a lot of the information that is passed on to the American public as being true. And when you take that and combine it with the social media aspect, because you all rely so much on social media, that's a huge, huge problem. You're not getting analysis on the U.S. in supporting the Saudis as they're trying to blow Yemen off the map. And why? This whole thing about withdrawing troops from Syria. No. The president was very clear. We're here for the oil, and we're going to take the oil. But you don't hear any analysis on, well, doesn't that violate international law? Isn't that illegal? Isn't America becoming a war criminal by, in the technical term in international law, is pillaging. Isn't America then guilty of pillaging, which violates international law? We're not hearing anything about the WikiLeaks guy in London, Julian Assange. The UN has just reported that Julian Assange is being psychologically tortured. And they expect that he's going to die in prison probably within the next 2 to 3 months. That's not, Rachel Maddow isn't talking about that. We're not hearing about that on CNN. And those are the things that are going to have a much more lasting impact than a lot of the stuff that we're being fed fed through mainstream media. I would ask, anybody here familiar with the term surveillance capitalism? You need to look up surveillance capitalism, because as millennials, as people that are tied to your phones, surveillance capitalism is now the way that Google and Facebook and Twitter maximize their profit by all the data that they are able to collect, by all of the searches that you do, all of the things that you look up, the manner in which you communicate with people. All of those little data points are put into algorithms and databases and monetized and sold so that the information that you receive on that phone can be controlled, so that you can be controlled. If I control your information, I control your world.
Point well taken. I want to jump in right now so we can keep it moving. I was thinking about your term surveillance capitalism through the context of George Orwell's book, 1984. I'd encourage you to read that as well. When you start talking about Big Brother watching you, surveillance capitalism is definitely the personification of Big Brother watching you. I'm going to jump to Go ahead.
Just one quick point on that. When Google launched, we all thought that that was a passive action, that we were just looking stuff up and it didn't have any lasting impact. Now what we find out is, no, it's not passive, it's incredibly active, and it's the data collection aspects of that make it such.
Which is why things are free. So you got to watch out what's free on social media, because they got to pay for it some way. All right, with that being said, gentlemen, I'm definitely getting ready to jump off script just a little bit. I'm going to jump to number 4 because it falls in as opposed to number 3. And I've had the opportunity to talk to about 50 incoming college students, juniors and sophomores, freshmen and sophomores throughout the course of this semester, both here and at the University of Maryland. And students say that they just can't relate to news anymore because they can't determine what real news and fake news is. So in addition to whose responsibility is it to make sure this generation understands how to differentiate the two, what strategy could we set forward? And Guy, that's where you're going to come in as our designated journalist who speaks to the next generation.
All right, well, as you know, and excuse me, that's a lazy-ass answer. Just plain and simple. So you mean to tell me because you haven't taken it upon yourself to find out what's real and not real, and because your phone didn't tell you it's real or not real, you don't want to find out any more information? Is that what was said?
I think it may have a lot to do with bickering burnout in news, where you see bickering on Capitol Hill.
Once again, I would say that's lazy. When we all get up to go to class in the morning, when that alarm goes off, I don't feel like getting up, and neither do you, but you get up because you have to. Same thing with the news. When the news comes across and you're trying to figure out whether or not it's fake or real, it's up to you to determine whether it is real or fake. I can't tell you how many times I have said something incorrectly on the radio, and people will say, well, word is bond. That's what you said, and that's what it is. And I stand corrected. It said, no, I didn't mean that. I should have said this. But no, I heard it on the radio. I saw it on TV, and that's what it is. No, you didn't take it upon yourself to find out whether or not that happens to be the truth. So once again, I will reiterate, I think it's a lazy excuse. We live in a day and age where everything is instant. You want to find out something, you're going to pull out your phone right now and Google it, and you'll have the answer within a number of seconds. Well, once again, you have to take it upon yourself in order to make sure that it's true. I can't tell you how many times I research topics, whether it be something involving the president, whether it be something that's from a congressional matter. Even yesterday, we look at what happened in the state of Virginia with regard to the elections. The Democrats really just, the entire state turning blue, if you will, taking the legislature and the governorship. This is the first time in, over 20 years that both of which have been blue. That's a big deal, and I say that and it relates to this because ultimately those folks took their time to do the research that voted for those folks, and not only that, but they were really upset with what was currently happening. So it's not easy. They had to get up and go vote. How many people would rather go to watch a movie or go get that Popeye's chicken sandwich? Honestly. So for that I would once again say that's laziness. And I think that the generation with regard to millennials, that's what they experience a lot. No disrespect, but a lot of times it seems as if everything has been handed to you, and it should be your job to find out yourself.
All right, well, can I step up and just throw it out there? And I'm gonna make a defense, Mr. Attorney, for the millennials for a second. And only to say, I get where you're coming from because you do have the information at your fingertips. However, there's clutter behind verbiage, innuendo, things of that nature. Between 18 and 22, I didn't know what nuclear proliferation was. It took me until I was about 27, 30 to understand that proliferation means racking up a whole lot of stuff, you know? So I'm just wondering, is the verbiage out there in this technological world where there's so many news outlets cluttering the way that they get the information, or is it just a lack of interest in wanting to know?
I think it's a combination of the two, but let me also say, Guy's being incredibly humble. I've listened to him a lot. I've never heard him say anything wrong on radio. So you're being very humble. It's a number of things. First of all, you have to ask yourself, are you looking at sources to learn or to validate? Because a lot of people watch a particular news program or read a particular newspaper, if some people still do that, to validate what they already believe to be correct, as opposed to trying to learn something new. So the question is, when you turn on MSNBC or when you turn on Fox, are you trying to learn something new, or are you trying to validate what you think you already know? And you're turning to that source that'll make it comfortable for you in that process. I think millennials have been done an incredible disservice. These cell phones are killing us. You got to get your face out of your phone. And you've got to, whether you're looking at the phone, walking down the street, trying to cross the street and get hit by a car, or step in a hole, or get run over by somebody on a scooter, or whether it's just the inability to look beyond that little bitty screen and what's on it. You've got to look at multiple sources. So if you like reading the Washington Post, that's fine. But you have to also read the Financial Times, or you have to read Mint Press News. Independent journalism right now is an incredibly invaluable source, because that's where you're going to
Examples. When you're saying to me, you're talking what? Young Turks, stuff like
Mint Press News, for example.
Walmart. Okay,
MintPressNews.com, GlobalResearch.com. Some of these aggregators, and for those of you who don't know the word aggregator,
collecting from various websites to form a story.
but independent journalists, that's where you're going to find out what's happening in Yemen and why. That's where you're going to find out what's happening with Julian Assange and why. And those things really matter. So you've got to expand your sources, because critical thinking isn't being taught at the high school level anymore, right?
Yeah, it
Asking-
is. It's called Common Core, right?
Oh, okay.
I just,
Critical analysis. The very simple thing of asking yourself, does this make sense? For example, the Jeffrey Epstein story. The guy in New York, the pedophile in New York that allegedly hung himself in jail. Does that story make sense? Here's a guy whose whole career was spent on providing sexual favors with young boys and girls for very powerful people and creating data on them, blackmailing them based upon the fact that he knows who's with these little girls and little boys. He gets busted and then he hangs himself. He doesn't avail himself of the power of the information he's amassed about the wealthy and rich, powerful people in the country, in the world. It doesn't make sense. Now, I'm not saying that he didn't hang himself. I don't know if he did or if he didn't. But what I'm saying is, when I listen to that narrative, it doesn't make sense. Ask yourself, does this make sense? And the answer is no, it doesn't. So you got to get your faces out of your phones. And you've got to start asking yourself some very simple questions. Are what these people telling me, does it make sense? And if it doesn't, ask yourself why it doesn't, and then start looking at other sources, and you'll start to see, you'll start to get some decent answers to the questions that you're asking yourself.
Julius, your thoughts?
Well, I would agree. The abilities to cross-reference a point that you receive from whatever source is key for you to be able to formulate your own opinion, because you have to be real careful to accept someone else's view as a fact without verifying its truth. So if nothing else, the skill of getting at least 3 sources and combining those sources and see how they deal with that same issue to determine whether or not, you believe whatever it's offering. One strategy, and it is a problem with the technology, things being provided for you without having to do the research. If you use the network news as a test, look at a story that's told on one of the networks, then go to a cable channel, just look at MSNBC, see how they report it, then go to Fox, see how Fox looked at it, and then go to the BBC. You'll see that there's different views offered by each source. And then you use that as a litmus test, and then you form your own opinion. But the problem is people are so gullible or so
Partisan, maybe?
partisan or lazy, somewhere in there with accepting the first whatever they receive. And that just starts it. You've got to, and in educational settings, it's about learning how to think, learning how to prove, and learning how to research. So if you're only, using one leg, you're not getting the full experience.
One other quick point there. When you check different sources, sometimes it won't be that you get a different perspective. It's that the BBC might give you one more bit of data that the Washington Post didn't give you. The Washington Post perspective and the Financial Times or the BBC perspective might very well be the same. But when you read into the 3rd or 4th paragraph of the story, there might be one little point that the BBC gives you that the Post didn't give you, and then you go, oh, that's why this is really going on. The Washington Post didn't tell me that, and it might just be because they didn't think it was important. But that one little bit of data, oh, wow, that's why this is important to me.
Can I just add one? So, a prime example of that, excuse me guys, I'm sick, is that I got a chance to cover the parade. So I was reporting for Fox for the Nationals parade. And I want to use this as an example. I was chit-chatting with a Republican after the parade, and he was making mention of Pitcher Doolittle, who opted not to go to the White House. Quite honestly, I'm not a big Nationals fan. I don't know a lot about the players, but what I did know is that there was a guy sitting on the stage, and I was from here to maybe where the audio center is right there, the audio room. And I saw this gentleman on the stage, this guy, and I saw a little kid on his dad's shoulders. And the little kid would dab. And then the guy all the way back there that just won the championship, he looked, and then he dabbed. And the little kid said, oh my God, he recognized me. And then he dabbed this way. And then that guy dabbed this way as well. And the kid looked to his dad and started crying. I saw it with my own eyes. And then come to find out, that was Doolittle. And I say all that to say that I told the Republican that. And he said, well, wow, I thought that guy was an a-hole. You know, he doesn't like Trump. It was a different perspective that I was able to give him of that player, of that person that he had already assumed to be somebody that, you know, he didn't like because of what he thought about Trump. It's just another example of you got to get as much information as you can so you can feel whatever way about the guy, but know that when it comes to kids, he was giving back in a major way, and he was doing something that a lot of those other players were not doing.
Okay.
And to that point, and you mentioned the divisiveness. Why does Doolittle, standing on principle, have to be an a-hole? Why can't he just be a guy that is standing on principle and saying, I disagree with the politics of this individual, and I'm not going to allow my presence to validate what I disagree with, so I'm just not going to shout. Whether you like...
And that is one of the, 5 freedoms that we guaranteed under the First Amendment, right?
Because he doesn't want to go to the White House, he's an a-hole, or no, maybe he's just a man of principle, and he's going to stand on his principles.
Point well taken. All right, here's one that strikes real close to our hearts, particularly as African Americans. I talk to a lot of African American students now, students who were born into the days of President Barack Obama. Their first images of a president is of an African-American man. So they say they no longer want to hear anything about slavery or the civil rights movement, despite the fact that they have access to history on their electronic devices. So is knowledge of history, guys, and where we came from still relevant in the electoral process? That's a jump ball for anybody who wants to grab it first.
Absolutely. Absolutely. I was at an XM meeting a couple of years ago, and a guy who said to me, I think politics is stupid. I said, yeah, and that's why you're stupid. If you don't know from whence you come, then you really have no idea where you are. And if you don't know where you are, you don't know where you're going. And if you don't know where you're going, any road will get you there. There is so much very important, relevant information that we just don't have about us, about our circumstance, about our plight, and why we are where we are, and how we've gotten to where we are. And so it's unfortunate that there's an incredible amount or incredible number of young folks that don't want or don't value or don't see value in the historical context. My whole writing approach is historical context. If you read my book or read my op-eds, I'm always trying to explain the now based upon the past. So if you think that the shooting of Tamir Rice or
Trayvon
Garner or, you know, but you don't understand William Patterson's book, We Charge Genocide, which was written in 1950. William Patterson took a petition to the UN charging the United States with genocide in 1950 for the way that blacks were being killed, hung, murdered by police. So a lot of people will say, in listening to Donald Trump and say, or listening to the response, how did America get to this point? And not understand that this is where America has always been. But if you're not understanding that history, then you'll just walk around totally confused. And unfortunately, there are too many folks that are totally confused.
It's very important to know your history for those reasons. But then you take it to, the next point to understand how the system was designed by using that system. And the system that was created by, the Anglo-Saxon whites who controlled the founding of the United States has been modeled by the Nazis. They used the system of slavery in their own way. If you don't take the time to understand that, again, the people who are controlling your resources have the system designed so that they can continue to control it, so that they can have their way with the resources, then you won't understand how you can possibly attack it or correct it or solve your problem in the future. And we know, after slavery, they promised, 40 acres and a mule. They gave us civil rights legislation, all the things that were supposed to come through those efforts never were materialized. So there is hypocrisy in the system, but you don't let that be what you're driving to understand. You want to know the mechanics, what kind of laws they put on the books. How did those laws, how were they designed to oppress people? How in what way were those laws modernized to be enacted today? When you start looking at the system in that way, you have to know where slavery started from, and you have to begin to put an analysis to say, well, how are we in this position today if we're going to correct it for future generations, or else we will continue to duplicate what's happened before.
Knowing your history will change how you think. I'll give you a prime example. For me, when I hang out with my boys, N-word please, N-word this, N-word that, and N-word that. Recently, for maybe a couple of years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, for Christmas, I got my dad the whole 23andMe thing so he could find out his heritage. We got it back, and as far as we knew that, we all came from Africa and had a little Jamaican going on, and then all of a sudden, at the bottom it says 4% British and 2% Irish. So I'm sitting there, I'm Dad, I don't remember you ever telling me about, we had Irish and British. You said, well, Guy, that happened to be the slave master that was raping your great-great-great-grandmother. And I'm pretty sure that as he was raping my great-great-great-grandmother, as the other slave masters did for many of your ancestors, he was dropping the N-word. So that right then and there made me say, do I want to say that word now, knowing that that's the word possibly my great-great-great-grandmother heard as she was being violated night in and night out? It changed me because I found out my history. I understood my history. It became tangible. It affected me emotionally. It will do the same for you if you find out your history. That's why it's important you know it.
And I'd like to jump in, and when you start talking about historic context, it's even bigger than just African American history. I mean, you just start thinking about, and let me just give you some perspective for those of you in the Google generation. When you say Donald Trump, he equals Nixon. Do a Google of Nixon. You'll find the same behaviors, the same anti-press behavior that marked the Nixon presidency. And I'm not that old, but That was my formative years of understanding politics and the impeachment at that time. But the behaviors that you see from Donald Trump right now as President of the United States mirror those of Richard Nixon, which has subsequently led Congress to want to begin this impeachment inquiry. Also, you've seen detention centers where families are torn apart and you've got primarily Hispanic people put behind cages and what have you. Well, if you go back to the World War II, they were known as detention centers, where scores of Asian Americans were, Japanese Americans were put into these holding centers during after Pearl Harbor, seen as threats to America. So just be mindful when we start talking about what goes around comes around. That is historical context. And finally, before we get out of here, gentlemen, and if there are any questions that you may have, we've got 2 mics set up, so we'll try to quickly move in through this one. But finally, another one of the circumstances that I think I can identify with most of all, that the younger generation of voters have spoken to me about this semester is truth in the election process. A lot of potential first-time voters say that one of the great things that concerns them is this notion of popular vote versus the Electoral College. And when you've got congressional bickering from both sides of the aisle being a turnoff as well, how do we, as communicators, legal professionals, advisors, not only as professors but in life, engage students new to the election process when, quite frankly, it's been like a hamster on a treadmill, twirling and twirling but going nowhere for arguably the last 12 years?
You got to get involved. Participation is the one area where I think millennials have not fully exercised the abilities to impact the current more than current society. And why is that? You have to be 18 years old to be an elected official for most offices. I think when you get to the president and vice president on a national level, 35 and over, what have you. But it's nothing stopping, a person once they, reach the age of majority from getting out and participating. If not necessarily running for office, volunteering, working with persons who are trying to be elected, so then you can be on the inside to see really what's going on. It's easy from the outside to, attack and to criticize, but, being a part of it will allow the voice of the younger person to be, at the forefront of the decision-making that goes on when the elected officials get to the next point. If you're not there, most people say, okay, older person's vote, so, we don't need to deal with the younger voters. They don't care, they're apathetic, they're not into this. Well, the only way to change that is to get involved. I ran an unsuccessful race for a judgeship last election cycle, but for this county. And it just showed me, I got a chance to meet and talk to people from a different perspective. I had worked on campaigns before, but being, a candidate, puts you on the spot a lot of times. And you get a chance to hear different perspectives. People open up to you. And it really takes you to a different level. So I would encourage, more college students, just get out there. You will be surprised at the people who will be willing to support your efforts, but then also you'll be surprised of the influence that you can make in the system.
I like that saying where they say it is what it is. And quite honestly, the way the system is set up is the way it is. So if you want to change that, if you don't like it, you have to take part. You have to be active. I equate it to like a football game. Let's say the president's the quarterback. Congress happens to be the lineman. Well, even those of you who are in the stands watching the game are still a part of that game. You got to be in the stands. You can't be outside walking around doing your own thing. You don't like the system, as you just made mention of, Professor Gray? Well, it's up to you to get involved at any level so you could begin to change the way that system is set up. I think it's that easy. It's easy as 1, 2, 3. It's about involvement.
And along with that, I think you first have to ask yourselves, what is important to you? What matters to you? And why does it matter to you? And then start doing some research, start doing some reading on that or those particular issues that are important to you. You might be close to being homeless. You might be homeless. You might live in a very affluent neighborhood. So if you live in a very affluent neighborhood, homelessness might not be your issue. If you're homeless, homelessness might be your issue. You have to, it's so much more critical for you all than it was for me when I was sitting in those seats. The game was a whole lot clearer. And back in the 70s and in the 80s, when I was sitting in the seats, there were only 3 newspapers to read. The game was so much clearer, and it seemed simpler back then because there was an order. The United States was still the dominant force. There was an order. Not saying that's not a value statement. There was an order, and you followed that order. Now we are in the midst of America being under attack because that order is now being challenged. And there's all this turmoil, whether it's internal or whether it's coming from other countries. That's what's causing so much of this, this tension and distress. So I would say, first, ask yourselves, what's important to you as an individual? And use that issue or those issues as your guide to the action that these two were talking about.
Hey, folks, how about this for our panel? Did they rip it, drop the mic, or what? Are there any questions while we have this amount of knowledge and clarity on the Hill? Would you step to the microphone, state your name, and we would love to have your input, sir. And again, we can't thank you gentlemen enough for joining us and sharing your knowledge in a clear, concise way that hopefully has resonated with the people who are going to step up and vote for change.
Okay, sir. First off, what's your name?
Wilmer Leon.
Wilmer Leon. Okay,
Dr. Wilmer Leon.
You earned that, sir.
Yes.
Okay, so
I did that.
my first question is, would you be able to enlighten me on the Julian Assange case? Because I actually never heard of that. And then my second question would be, how do you think, like us as millennials, what's the best method to get over phones? Because it's like an addiction. You just can't go without it for long periods of times because of the fact we're so common, used to it.
And can I jump in? This is what they know. And again, I'm not trying to make excuses, but when you're born into something, it's your only frame of reference and your perspective. We get that. But you got to embrace the fact that there was life before the net, cell phones, and, handheld technology.
The rotary phone was amazing.
Oh, man.
Was it amazing?
How about having to get up and go change the TV?
And it went off at midnight. Julian Assange. Okay, are you familiar with WikiLeaks?
No, I'm not. Oh, no, WikiLeaks, yes.
Okay, Julian Assange is the founder of WikiLeaks. Okay? And as the founder of WikiLeaks, Julian Assange and his team of journalists, and contrary to what many will say, yes, they are journalists, released a trove of information about the United States government and a lot of the things that the government is doing around the world and how the United States government has been lying to the American people. And the United States government didn't like that. They went after Assange. He wound up getting asylum in the Ecuadorian embassy in London. The United States put so much pressure on Ecuador that Ecuador finally put him out. And he's now in a prison in London. The United States is trying to get London to extradite him back here to the United States so that the United States can put him on trial, I believe, for espionage. And he was in the Ecuadorian embassy for about 3.5 years. And he's now in solitary confinement in a prison in London, and he's basically been psychologically tortured, and he's going crazy. And the United States would much rather have him either go crazy and die, or just die. In fact, the Roger Stone trial, which just started yesterday, Assange is supposed to be a witness in the Roger Stone trial.
Right.
But the United States will not allow him to testify, because if he testifies, he will expose the fact that the whole Russian hacking story is a flat out lie. And that's what they really don't want him to do. So that's the quick on Julian Assange. In terms of your phone, you know, I would say it's like any other addiction. They say you can break addictions in 21 days. That if you are able to sustain a certain behavior for 21 days, or avoid a certain behavior for 21 days, that you are able to break that addiction. You all, unfortunately, have become addicted to these phones. And, you know, just sit down as you're doing your stuff and asking yourself, is this really necessary? How is this relevant to what I'm doing, or what I need to be doing right now? Or am I just mimicking a behavior that I have been taught to? See, because I'm 60 years old. I don't use my phone. The one thing I use my phone for, to make telephone. You know, when I want to take pictures, I pull out my Nikon. I don't use my phone to take pictures. So first of all, you have to ask yourself, is this a behavior I need to change? And if you say to yourself, maybe not change it, maybe I need to modify this behavior so that I'm actually talking to people, looking them in the eye, having personal engagement, instead of sitting next to a lovely young lady like this, and instead of turning to her and saying, wow, you're really attractive, I send her a text message. Wow, you're really attractive.
Actually,
Right back,
actually,
get away from me, stupid.
the proper term in that context, Doc, would be I am. You would not necessarily text, you would I am.
You know, that's the best thing I can do.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay.
She would also
Yeah.
respond with a LOL smiley face. but brother, you took the first step already. One, you had you got up and you asked the question. It's not easy to do that. It's not easy to say, hey, who was the guy over in the embassy? Can you elaborate on that? I'm not well versed on that. Two, hey, how can you help me to get rid of this addiction with regard to my phone? Took the first step, man. Kudos going out to you. High five.
And, go ahead, George. You got one?
Oh, do you have another question? Or do you...
Oh, actually, I have different questions for each of you.
Oh,
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Lambert, so my question for you is, I'm actually glad you talked about about the N-word, because a couple years back when I was in high school, I had a friend where I would tell them, I would try to tell them how slave owners would used to say those derogatory terms to them, but then they would always make a claim back towards me saying, what did they say? They talked about how
It's a term of endearment, correct?
endearment,
Yep.
Exactly.
We're reclaiming the word.
Yeah.
So how do you feel about that?
All in
I
the
stand
name
with
of
what I
love.
said. One of my very good friends, I'm not going to make mention of who he is, celebrity, and told me, Guy, I will always call you that. He said, that is my way of showing you that I love you. And I think it just boils down to ignorance. To know what, I define, a word is defined by what it says in the dictionary. And it says it's a derogatory term, as is the Redskins. When I'm on the air now and I talk about sports, I do sports, I don't say the Redskins anymore. I love the Redskins. I love that name. I want to say it, but if you look it up, it has the same definition as the N-word. I was ignorant to that. I didn't know that. So I discovered that, and now I corrected myself and don't use that word anymore. Same thing. I just think it just boils down to ignorance, man. Stay strong with what you believe in. And then not only that, but, let them know why. I explained that story to you all as to why I no longer use that word. It affected me emotionally. I think about that. My great-grandmother getting raped and a guy calling her that as he does that. Why would I use that as a term of endearment? Why would I say that to you? Just doesn't work for me.
Oh, and my last question for you is, what do you think are the positives and negatives of both the Democrats and Republicans?
Wow.
Well, that's a good question. So I'll say this: I am not a Republican nor a Democrat. I don't necessarily know if you want to call me an independent. I go with the best candidate. I think whatever your beliefs have, I just don't believe you should be able to choose between Coke and Pepsi. Sometimes I like Sunkist, sometimes I like a little ginger ale. But what I will say is that I don't have a definite answer for that, because it's not for me to decide what you like, brother. It's for you to do the research. Now, obviously, with there's two major party systems, you're going to have to side with one. You don't necessarily have to, but you might like a little bit more what the Democrats do versus what the Republicans do. I can tell you from a money standpoint, I like the way the Republicans roll. I can tell you from a Democratic standpoint, for the most part, as of late, I'm down with how they treat our people or attempt to treat our people. So it's up to you, brother, to really decide as to what fits you, what you like. That's not for me, nor do I think anyone else to tell you, what the best thing is about each organization or each party, if you will.
They have things called a platform, and you look at the planks in the platform, and whichever speak to you is how you should govern your decision. But I'm like you guys. I'm independent, and that comes with its challenges, particularly in our beloved, Red County. Julius?
Yeah, and then for my questions for you, sir, is what are ways for people who don't have any background experience in anything political? How will we get our foots in the doorsteps?
As a candidate, or just to learn more?
Yeah,
about
just to learn just to learn.
Well, in this area, I would encourage you to go to the office of the county election office, which happens to be just 5 minutes from here. Mm-hmm. And what that would do, it's a wealth of information. You've got how different districts voted for different candidates. You've got the candidates and their platforms. You can look at the financial contributions to campaign. All this information is at that office. That's one. So if you're on that level, how does the county work, for instance? You would go there. If you are interested in trying to run for an office, find a elected official, someone who inspires you, someone you may be interested in, or an issue that they are supporting that relates to something that you feel. Then volunteer. Oftentimes, as a volunteer, you could be put into a range of different things and learning about the process. You could be at a phone bank where oftentimes elected people running for office will have multiple people calling into certain areas where they need more voters, and they'll give you a script, and then you're able to talk to people and engage. That's one area, and then the other, if there's any association or community group or church that you're involved with, engage from that group's perspective. What does that group need? What is that group supporting? And then find out, again, officials or other campaigns that are supporting that, and then just really get involved on that level. You will find a lot of resources just by getting engaged at one of those points.
And then my last question towards you is, for the news outlets that are more biased, what are ways to tips that will let us know what to look out for that might be biased, so we can focus on different news outlets?
And it's really, from my perspective, the issue that they're presenting, the view that they're presenting, you probably won't know if they are just giving you that one view without doing a little research to find out what others are saying. So, what I do, again, I go from news station to news station, and I'll go quick because they always talk about the same issue within a minute of themselves. Somebody, unfortunately, recently, the Oxon Hill Popeye killing. And very unfortunate, but it went from NBC to ABC on that, and you would, again, you're going to get a different perspective. So if they're biased, you'll get the other side from maybe the other channel. But if you don't, then go to another source. You know, then maybe if you can't get a newspaper, then, you know, do a Google search and see what's there. But those are just views. You know, again, we can't determine a fact until we prove that fact to be true. And so you got to do a check down, because anytime you're going to rely on what they're saying, it's possible it could be biased. There's a chance it could be true, but we won't know until we do a little extra research to confirm it or to disprove it.
And this is where your phone does become an asset.
Right.
Because on my phone, I have CNN, the Wall Street Journal, the Financial Times, and
The grill?
I have the Grill there. So I can just quickly go from site to site, go from story to story, and look at that site to see how it's being covered. So this is one way, one manner in which your phone actually becomes an asset, because you can quickly go through different sites and see how the story is being covered.
All right, thank you all for answering my questions.
Thank you. Good luck, man.
Anybody else? Any more questions? Well, again, how about a round of applause for our esteemed group of panelists? We also want to represent for our editor-in-chief who had to go to class, and our student government president, Ana Enriquez and Mikhail Floresca, respectively. We want to thank them for their input. We want to thank also members of the OWL staff, Marquise Everett, Mr. Eric Pinkney, thank you so much for putting it in. Big shout out to PGCC TV, Marshall Johnson and his crew. Thank you so much for taking on this very important matter so that we can have it archived. And we will be doing this again. You know, part of the growth and development of being college students is to, in fact, learn how to critically think. And these days also with that critical thinking comes a reprogramming, if you will, as it relates to interpersonal communications. I teach an interpersonal communications course at the University of Maryland, and to watch how this next generation has become so adept at communicating electronically and missing out on communicating with each other, it's difficult to persuade people or to buy into what you're thinking about without the use of interpersonal communication. And guys, it's interesting because I know as a guy who worked in radio a great deal, that much like writing, when I'm behind the mic on writing, I've got somebody's mind. So that's like a easel to me. I can paint pictures with words. I can influence with decisions. And hopefully that's something that does in fact stimulate critical thought. So the bottom line is, this is an election that's going to be defined by millennial activism, whichever side of the line that you're on. You don't get out, you don't vote, you don't have the right to complain. And that's the bottom line, okay? There is no excuse not to vote. The only bad vote is to not vote at all, quite frankly. It's just like when it comes to questions. I don't necessarily believe there's such thing as a bad question. The only bad question is the one that you don't answer. And as an educator at an institution like this, we shouldn't take the opportunity for these forums for granted. So I would suggest that we will have a YouTube link. Share the YouTube link with your friends, because I just freeloaded off of their knowledge, and I'm greatly appreciative of what they've done, and especially the work of Dr. Charlene Dukes, our president, Dr. Scheherazade Foreman, our Dean of Student Success and Engagement, Mr. Nell Simpson, our program manager for the Office of Student Engagement and Leadership, and the OSEL team. Thank you to Ms. Kim Wilson, my compatriot from the Reflection side. And Lawrence, when is the Reflections magazine going to be November 20th, so we look forward to having another student publications event on, I know it's time for me to shut up. Anyway, on November 20th, 2019, we will be unveiling the fall edition of the Reflections Magazine student literary magazine. So if you're in the Prince George's County community or in the metro area and checking this out, please feel free to join us. And most of all, we're less than a year away from what's going to prove to be, like Julia said, the most critical election probably in the last 50 years, and the ramifications of this next year politically are going to impact you for the rest of your lives. So it's very important that the millennials get involved. Dr. Wilma Leon, Guy Lambert, Julius Terrell, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you all for joining us as well. My name is Mark Gray. I'm proud today to be the advisor for the OWL newspaper. So on behalf of everybody with student publications and from Prince George's Community College, we hope this was enlightening, and we look forward to seeing you on campus sometime real soon. Thanks.